Hello, everybody. So here we are for another episode of Career and Spirituality Conversations. I'm Julie Pone. I'm supporting spiritual seekers having a career experience. And I'm here with Stacy. Stacy Kehren Idema is the founder and managing director of Global Collective. And Global Collective is a social impact technology business that removes bias in investment by focusing on what and how over who. So that's going to be super interesting. You know, I'm excited to have that discussion with you because we met recently. So it's going to be a discovery of your parcours, and I'm super excited about that.
Me too, Julie. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so maybe before we start, I was meant to do that every time and usually forget, but I'm inspired today. Will we take just a minute or two to take a couple of deep breaths, just relax and center ourselves?
Great idea.
Okay, awesome. So for everyone watching us, if you are in capacity to do that, close your eyes. And for a few moments, just bring your attentions to your chest and the center of your chest where your heart is. And just breathe in and out as you imagine your breath flowing in and out through your heart. And slowly deepening the breath and slowing down the breath. Breathing a little bit deeper and slower than you usually do. And setting the intention to have a conversation that will resonate with everyone who is going to listen to us. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Stacy. So Stacy, I usually start with two questions, and I'm going to give you a head start on both so that if you want to answer one at a time or weave them together, it's up to you.
Okay.
First, I'd love to know what's your relationship to spirituality, or what's your definition of spirituality? And then for you to tell us more about you, your story, how did you end up doing what you're doing now, and possibly how did spirituality weave into it or had an impact? So the mic is yours.
Beautiful. Those are beautiful questions. To answer what is spirituality to me, it's a fun and very deep story, and I'll get there, but I think how I define it now is really connection to myself and connection to nature, earth, other humans. The journey started as a guilty Catholic, being raised as a guilty Catholic. So sitting in the front pew every Sunday, having to be so perfect and quiet, and being forced to really understand what was being said. I know that at that time I considered spirituality church. So it was very interwoven, very intertwined. And it didn't really occur to me that they were very distinct, that the church itself is just a structure. And that within that structure, you get to define what it is and who you are, and that spiritualness of yourself. So fast forward to my early 20s, that definition really started to transform and separate itself when I actually learned about Buddhism.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so I was in my early career at the time. I was in corporate America, and I thought that that was my path to my success because I grew up sitting at the kitchen table talking business. Both of my parents were entrepreneurs, and the stress of knowing what it was like to be an entrepreneur was a stress I swore I would never have.
Oh.
And so I ventured off to corporate America believing that that was my path. And I got a couple of years into it, and I started young. I started in my very early 20s, and then went back to school, and uniquely went back to a Lutheran school. And it was through some of those classes and the religion classes that we were required to take that I learned of Buddhism.
Oh.
And it was a moment of the first moment of really reconnecting to myself and realizing that I was responsible for myself. And at that time, I was probably 23, maybe 24. And I always had this curiosity and this desire to speak. Let's not speak to myself. I had a very active conscience, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And so what does that, how does that translate? Is that you asking yourself questions about?
everything. I was so curious, like just watching people and watching things happen and seeing patterns. As a child, I'm a product of the 70s and 80s, so it was you were to be quiet, you were to be seen and not heard.
Mm.
And so because I didn't speak my voice very often, I spoke to myself. In fact, I thought it was crazy because I would talk to myself constantly. And I had such a voracious curiosity for things and seeing the patterns and seeing human behavior and how things played out and feeling things happen before they happened.
It sounds like a fascinated anthropologist, or like another species studying humans.
Yeah. That's a great way of describing it.
Yeah. Or
It
just the soul studying the human experience.
right.
And having being conscious of it.
Right. And so I didn't tell anyone that I had all these thoughts in my head because I was so afraid. I already felt like I didn't fit into anything. So I thought telling somebody that I had these thoughts rolling around in my head, people would send me away. And so I kept them quiet.
Yeah.
And internalizing things like that certainly doesn't do you good. You certainly learn about yourself and you learn about where you are different and certainly where you don't fit in, which can then lead you into these places of being with people where you truly don't feel like you fit in. You continue to reinforce that. So that's the downfall of, being inside.
Yeah.
And that path to a greater spirituality came when I started to speak more about the things and speaking up and speaking out and feeling I was already uncomfortable, but speaking out, there was still a discomfort, but I felt a relief for speaking out and speaking up. So I continued on my career being awkward and uncomfortable even in that space. Because those patterns and the human behaviors and the habits, I saw all of it play out in corporate. And growing up in that space where you were told that it's just business, and seeing the same habits, whether they were in corporate or whether they were at home, I came to this realization that business is always personal. And so I started to speak that statement, and it was dismissed by many.
Okay.
And I'm like, go ahead.
What do you mean by business is always personal?
That you can't be one person in one place,
Yeah.
and another person in another place.
Ah.
Because then you're not being honest with yourself in one place or the other. And so, for example, if you have a really difficult time communicating in business, it's likely that you have a difficult time communicating at home, or possibly you're not heard at home. So you may attempt to communicate, but you're not being understood, or you're not being heard. And so the business is always personal really became my path to, even though I didn't feel like I fit in, it was that understanding and being more empathetic to human behavior. And that led me into emotional intelligence and really digging deep into the EQ space, being trained and educated in EQ, and leveraging that as a framework to communicate, especially as the latter part of my career was working with highly intelligent, highly emotional individuals and humans, entrepreneurs, mostly entrepreneurs in a corporate setting, doing a lot of innovative and groundbreaking work in technology, mental health, all the things that deal with human behavior, how we act, how we interact, how we communicate. So,
and at that stage in your life, you were not, you hadn't switched to being in business yourself. You were still in corporate, but working with entrepreneurs, correct?
I was working with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of medical doctors that were and PhDs who were very entrepreneurial in nature. Yeah. So I was in corporate for 26 years, for a long time. And you never realize it in the moment, but that last redundancy, it was serendipitous to really me following into that path and that fire that I always had inside to do something different, that I avoided and thought that entrepreneurship wasn't my path.
Sorry. Yeah.
So that last redundancy led me into becoming an entrepreneur. Yeah.
And how did so what was your first step then in business?
Into starting my business, or
starting your business? Like was it like a continuation compared to what you were doing in corporate, or was it something totally different that had wanted to be expressed and you hadn't given it any room yet?
I would say a little bit of both. So I thought, because I knew what I knew, because a lot of my experience also included launching new businesses, new products, new services, that because I knew what I knew, it would be that easy. And so I dove into it and treated it like it was my day job. I treated it like everything was in 30-minute segments. So most of my days were spent leading meetings, and they were in 30-minute or 60-minute segments. And so I didn't take any time off, which there's very few things I now regret. Now I understand the importance of really taking a hot minute to decompress and to allow yourself time to grieve the change, to reground yourself. I didn't. I gave myself a day off and I started in right away.
Oh my God, you launched straight from one to the other.
I did.
Yeah.
And so you asked me that question of if it was the same. There was parts of it. So I did a lot more coaching and that's how I led, was really from that framework. And that was the part that was really uncomfortable for most. It was not what they wanted.
What was the first business, your first business then?
The first business was coaching. I was very focused on helping women leaders and focusing on that leadership role and taking all the things that I had learned. However, I really waffled because I worked mostly with male executives and I missed working with them. And that then led me to really not knowing where to focus. So again, back to that, I didn't take any time off to do any reflection. So I was reflecting in the moment. And that was, I know now that's where the spirituality piece really started to kick in, because I finally followed that deeper desire for something different. And yet I was still fighting it by not listening to my intuition.
Because was it a conscious choice to work with women in coaching then?
Well, I thought that was the path I was supposed to take, that it would be the easiest path.
Okay.
And you're asking me such beautiful questions I hadn't even thought about in such a long time. I thought it would be the easiest path because it was me.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was me. And so I felt really torn between working with the men and working with the women and wanting to work with both. And at the time, I had joined a mastermind group, and it was very intense. It was several hours a week, homework after hours, and then still with this very rigid schedule. And so doing that work and feeling torn by the process with which it was designed and laid out, very masculine in nature. I then thought I needed more support, so I hired another coach. And through that, continued on that very regimented, very harsh, so very structured and scripted, very much like my corporate career. And at the end of those 8 months between those coaches, I burnt out again.
And like that's seeking of the structure. Why do you think that was? Was there some safety into it because you had been into it for so many years, or what was broken? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I hadn't yet learned to trust myself. I hadn't, what I know now is I hadn't been in touch with my feminine. And that feminine was only meant for certain people.
Oh, interesting.
That was my perception at the time, that it wasn't a quality and a characteristic and really a way of being in every human. I looked at it as being something that I had to earn. I looked at it as being something that I could find later. Very much like I had treated all the things I had wanted to do in the past while raising kids. The kids take priority, so I'll get to that when they're less of a priority.
Okay.
So that mindset.
You were working with, you chose to work with women, and so it sounds like you were working with women, but from a masculine.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so so you said you basically put it on the back burner in a sense.
Yeah.
So like how did you end up catching up with it? And what happened when you did?
Well, it kind of caught up to me. That thing that just kind of keeps burning inside of you, eventually it erupts and it ruptures, if you will. So I So it was a combination of a couple of things. Burning out is one of them. A divorce is another. And then really a love relationship that opened my eyes to really the masculine and the feminine. And in kind of those things that really weave together, now that I realize they all intertwined and weave together. My feminine ruptured. She said, I'm here.
Yeah.
It's time to listen. I've been speaking to you for a long time. It doesn't have to be this easy. And I gotcha.
To be this easy.
Or this doesn't have to be this hard. It can be easier. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you for that.
Interesting slip there.
No, it doesn't have to be this hard. It can be easy.
It can be easy, yeah.
And I got you. And little things like, even digging into and learning more about, or paying more attention to, say, professional athletes. So for those that I speak to about the masculine and feminine that may not get it, it may not resonate. Often I use a metaphor specific around professional athletes. So if you look at even a professional basketball player or a rugby player, you have your structure, you have your practice, you have the routine and the regimen. You also are required to eat healthy. You're also required to rest. And then you have game day, and game day is flow day. Because it's all about trusting your body. It's about trusting what you've prepared and practiced and nourished your body. It's all the things that you've done. And if you don't trust your body and you don't trust what you've done, you get in your head and the ego takes over. And then you force things. You don't use your grounded power that you have that's within your body. So you attempt to override the system, if you will. And that overriding shows up where you make silly mistakes, you burn out, you injuries.
Would that be an over masculine then?
Very much so. Very much so. So interwoven through all of this was then that spirituality element of getting really grounded and clear about who I am, and really coming to learn that spirituality is really all about myself. It's all about my connection to myself, for myself. And when I'm connected in a really healthy way, then I get to give in really healthy ways. I get to receive and give, and I get to continue that flow of receiving and giving.
Something that's coming to me as like earlier, you said you had these conversations in your head a little bit as if being that alien studying what, like the soul, like being, it sounds like having a hyper awareness of being the soul, studying and discovering what it means to be in a human body and with other humans. And with what you explained about the masculine and the feminine, it sounds like, because like the 3D, like it's polarized, it's polarities, and really having that discovery and having had that understanding of that aspect of reality being polarized in our human experience, and studying that very specifically and helping others to navigate it.
Yeah. I love how that you've just reframed that reflection. That's really powerful. Yeah. The life is full of polarity and we don't acknowledge it. We have day and we have night. We have black and we have white. We have the seasons. We have yin and yang. We have it's so, there's so polarity exists, and we can't have one without the other. It's really the two sides of the same coin. These things are.
And that's why I love your metaphor that you're using with sports. So what I got out of it is the practice, the everyday practice is the masculine, the nurturing the body and resting is the feminine, and then the game days is like when the two of them, you just step out of the way and the two of them work together, and you don't even have to interfere.
Yeah.
Masculine and the feminine aspect. So the yin and yang like flowing together, and yeah, that's awesome. And so what now? How is your understanding of the masculine and the feminine? How did it shape the evolution of your career and what you're doing now? And maybe like, in personal life, if you're
So back to when I made the shift and was focused on coaching women, and then really torn with wanting to coach men as well. One of the things that I did after the divorce was I took a leap and decided to explore being in another country. So I ended up in London for 6 months and really felt this divine experience in front of me to get to know the world in a really different way. A really powerful moment standing in Soho in lockdown. It was pretty quiet, and seeing 4 other couples speaking 4 other languages, and without minimizing myself, really feeling insignificant, but in a way that was, oh, I have so much to learn. I'm just this little microcosm of the earth, and this microcosm gets to go learn about the bigger macrocosm. I get to learn about it all. And so I hired an immigration attorney, applied for an innovator visa, and speaking about trusting the process, from the time that I said yes to it in May of 2021, to hiring the attorney, to securing an endorsing agency, to receiving that approval was less than 8 months. It was, yeah. And then I returned to London in early 2022, and I started a new business. And the business is Global Collective, and the focus is removing the bias in investment, leveraging technology, where we focus on the what and the how over the who. And this really becomes the embracing of the masculine and the feminine. As part of my research, and while I was really focused on helping women scale from 1 to 50 million to bridge that gender gap, what I learned along the way is that excluding men would be doing exactly what's happening right now. So it becomes the 2 sides of the same coin. If there's bias in one end, if we flip it over and do exactly what they're doing, it's the same. It's, just a different side of the same coin. And so as part of that, it was really, what I learned is that there's just a lack of awareness. There might be some conscious bias in that, but there's a lot of unconscious and unintentional. There's a lot of really good men out there that are really doing their best to figure out how they change how they invest in women-owned, women-led businesses. And so we have to start with bringing them along. They have to be included.
Stacy, I would have even a question before talking about investment. At the core, I'm just wondering, like very naively, but is there fundamentally a difference between a woman-led business and a male-led business? Or what do you see being the difference? Is it a difference in strategy or like energy?
So there's a couple of things. The language that men over women use. Men use more proactive, even dare I say egotistical type of language. Very, we'll get this done. And women are more preventive in their language. So they talk about how they might save. They speak about how they speak about the emotional elements that are so commonly dismissed as not being impactful, yet when we think about just the mental health and mental illness and the toll that it takes on employees, even executives and founders, business owners, mental illness is 50% greater. So if you think about the cost and the impact to businesses when those at the top are suffering, those emotional elements have deep impact on businesses. And women talk about that, unfortunately, because those in leadership roles are more men than women. We still focus on the very results, very linear, very masculine traits. And there are many women in leadership that do that as well. They lead from that place. Where we're starting to see the shift is in those female-led businesses that do really well. And there's so many statistics about diverse executive teams and boards. Competitive advantage is greater, return on investment is greater, employee satisfaction is greater. And so just knowing by having the diversity of both in there, it's great impact. Seeing them very distinctly separate, we're also seeing that all female-led businesses are doing things in different ways that have more feminine characteristics. They're focused on employee engagement and the contribution. They're focused on paying fairly. They're focused on pay levels that are equal. They are focused on flexible work schedules and things that empower employees to empower themselves and their families. So it's so with that, it's also helping each other learn how each other communicates in those ways. This isn't just you have to invest in us because we're women. Not every business is a good business, and that's regardless of gender.
Yeah.
And we get to help each other figure out how we get to do this differently.
When you were talking about this, and the different qualities of the masculine or the feminine showing up in how the business is led, it sounds like for the feminine traits, it's only that happens when the women have, like you have, met their own feminine and accepted their own feminine. I remember Alison Armstrong, who's been studying men, women for many decades. She explains that women, we have that quality of being adaptable, that at some stage we perceive what's valued, and at some stage then masculine ways were valued because that's what seemed to be working, and that we might as women embrace the masculine ways until, like you, maybe like the past leads us to embracing our feminine.
Yeah.
And so that's, yeah, it's just something that what you said was reminding me of. And now at the stage that you're at with Global Collective,
yeah,
the women that you see, like, is it sounds like it's not as much of an issue as that, women are embracing their feminine, or is there still work to do in that dimension? And are you still coaching women into really embracing their own feminine qualities?
Yeah. So I am. So while I work and build out the structure and the framework and the technology to really create ease for investors and then to start to learn to understand their business in a really different way, I am consulting with investors on what is it that they need to do differently, because some of the new things that are happening now are the investors are saying, okay, we're here to invest in women-owned, women-led businesses. And then as if it were that easy. Because if it was that easy, you would have done it a long time ago. So it's, how does this change? Where do you go? How do you interact? How do you change the language that you use? And then how do you support them after that? Because those are some of the things, the questions that I get, the fears that come up from them. And then for the women, very much focused on helping them really embody their feminine and really helping them understand, what does that mean for them? For some, it's as simple as getting really clear on being able to say no. So because it's a self-empowerment. My perception of the feminine used to be dresses and lipstick. And while I love dresses and lipstick, it's not. It's getting grounded in how you speak. It's getting grounded in trusting yourself. It's especially for women that are seeking investment, it's understanding who is your ideal investor. You're going to be in a relationship with them for 7 to 10 years. Not all money is good money. Getting really clear and getting really grounded and confident in how you speak. How do you perceive yourself? Because one of the things that, as part of this journey, that I've learned is really how we start to mirror each other. So it's common for an investor to perceive that a woman is not competent because she is fearful. She might have nervousness in how she interacts. And so there's that automatic assumption that she's not competent or capable. A woman can read that, and what will happen is she'll start to mirror that the crossed arms and that body language. So how does she learn to not take on his perception of her and stand firm and be grounded and still know that what she's doing is the right thing, and that she believes in what she's doing? And if they happen to not be the right person, they're not the right person, then you get to move on. But not internalizing those things. That's where some of the people-pleasing tendencies come up. That's where you get into we talked about over masculine. This is where you get into the over feminine, or the more victim mindset. How do we shift out of that and empower ourselves? Because we are empowered and we contribute to the gap more than what we think we do, by how we interact with ourselves, by how we communicate with ourselves, by how we communicate with other women.
Oh, yeah. Because we're talking about spirituality, and there is an energy component here about tuning into the other person and feeling that energy and responding to someone else's ways of being or inner state, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're getting downward spiral. Actually, it reminds me of something I've seen very recently. I don't remember who it was. I didn't know that person who was talking on video, saying there had been an experiment, a research done with women going in for interviews, and before that they told them that they wanted to assess the reactions based on facial appearance, like deformities or scars. So they got them to the makeup, showed them that they had designs, they transformed their face to have some scars of some sort on themselves, and then told them, okay, now you're going to get into the interview. And at the last minute, they said, okay, let us just retouch your face a little bit. And as they do that, they actually remove all the scars, but the woman doesn't know. So she goes into the interview room thinking that she has scars. And the results apparently were shocking. Well, shocking, maybe not so much when you understand, like, subconsciously
Yeah.
how this works, but that there had been bias or a report of bias towards the women who thought they had scars, even though they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And it
That's
feels like exactly what's going on.
yes. What an amazing experiment. So back to your question, yeah, and then I also work with women in that manner of how do you really understand yourself, your body, how you communicate. Most men don't. I was actually just having this conversation last night with a woman, and she and her business partner just got invested, and they did it in a very short time. And she said one of her biggest challenges is that she's very aggressive, not assertive. She's very aggressive because of the work that she's done. She goes, investors don't like it and it turns them off. And so she said, I've had to really learn how to leverage my business partner because she will come in a little softer and we get further with the conversations. We get what we want and it feels better for all of us. Otherwise, it just becomes this headbutting experiment. And that doesn't get us anywhere. That's where resentment and all those other low-level energy feelings come up.
And is a business partner
A woman.
A woman? Okay.
Yeah.
So one of them has embraced more of a feminine and she's more to the masculine side.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It is.
Yeah. So it goes to show that it's about masculine and feminine energy more than gender.
Very much so. And that's where I've been really focused on. And how do I say this? Have been kissing the edge of with people, having those conversations to have them really understand what it means and the differences. So even, for example, mothering is very masculine. Being a mother is feminine. Mothering, when you're chasing somebody around and trying to control everything, that's a masculine activity. It gets people really thinking in a different way to really understand just how they interact, how they communicate. And then what does that mean? Because right now, when it comes to that gender gap, that investment gender gap, there's so much focus on it being the men's problem and women contribute to it. So we can't just say that it's just a men's problem and they have to do something, because like I ask a lot of the women that I work with, okay, so let's say you have access to every investor in the world now what? And there's that panic moment of, okay, I get everything I've asked for, now what?
Be careful what you wish for.
So this is a collective effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But are you, like, where I'm unclear is, like, you're working with both the investor and the investees?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And like for, let's say, if there's women listening to you right now who are in business or thinking about getting in business, what what would be your advice for them? Or like, when would it be a good idea? At what stage is it a good idea to maybe get in touch with you, or like thinking about finding an investor? Yeah.
So, yep. So I would say there's a couple of things. One, as far as the investor and working with me to get invested and be prepared for that, that all depends on the type of business that you have. The working with me in general, because I take a very holistic approach. So some of my clients are business owners and really focused on taking their business to a different level, call it scale, if you will. So it may not need investment, but they really want to switch up their business. I work with them on a very holistic approach. So we work together very holistically from a business and personal, because it goes back to the business is always personal. So that's one way to work with me. For others, they're just transitioning or they're leaving a corporate role to go into business. And we focus a lot on still that integration, if you will, but that transition of what does that look like when you move from a corporate role to being an entrepreneur and setting up a framework that works.
Mm-hmm.
Be it
like taking a little break to reflect, maybe.
yes,
Between
yeah,
corporate and business.
yeah, yeah. And taking, I think that's the other thing, that there's a lot of assumptions that when you start over, that you're starting with nothing. So taking inventory on what's worked well, what's not worked. What are your true, genuine strengths? Because and I know this from my own experience, you dig into what you do really well, but just because you do it really well doesn't mean that's exactly what you're meant to be doing. And so where's your heart?
Yeah. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, in a sense.
Exactly. Boy, when I hired my first coach years ago, and within the first 90 minutes, I learned that everything that I was doing and everything that I promoted were all the things that I did really well that others thought that I should keep doing, that it wasn't what where my heart was and what led me forward. And that's there's a lot of grief in that process because you're letting go of old identities. And that becomes the huge shift. So whether for women, whether I'm working with them on, that transition or that transition, be it the scaling their business or just starting, there's a lot of grief. And so it's really important to make that part of the journey as well, to understand that, because if you push down that grief, it eventually will rupture somewhere. You'll be resentful or angry or frustrated or all those lower level emotions that really keep you stuck where you are.
And are there some maybe some pointers or some red flags as to whether some people will thrive or not thrive in business? Because I'm assuming after many years in corporate and maybe get tired of it, and one solution is to go and work for ourselves. But in your experience, is it the only way to thrive, or is it the only way to flourish at some stage, to just go into business, or not necessarily?
I don't think so. What I do know, what I've seen and what I definitely feel is you have to love what you do. You have to be in love with what you do. I know so many corporate people that love what they do. And I know so many corporate people that do not like what they do. And the same in business. If there's a lot of women that I know that love what they do and they loved it for a long time and then they fell out of love with it, and that's okay. But if you're doing it for somebody else, that's the part that won't work. Because there are going to be so many days that are really frustrating and difficult. And maybe it's just trying to sort the simplest thing. And if you can't sit back and think, okay, I get it now. It was worth it. And these might be the places I made it more difficult, and then move on and wake up the next day excited to do it, you'll kill yourself, like emotionally and mentally kill yourself. So it has to be that you're doing it because you love it.
Yeah. If what you do gives you energy, then you're on the right track. And then I'm guessing it doesn't really matter if you're doing it in your own business or for somebody else. Yeah. So that's
100%.
Yeah. So the GPS is, do you love the what you're going to be doing every day, regardless of whether it's your own business or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you end up working both with, like, mostly with women or also with men?
So mostly with women right now. I'm just starting to get started with men. I'm really excited. Yeah.
So the Global Collective, so where do we find you for people who are thinking of getting that support in either scaling or starting their business?
You can find me online. I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Under Stacy Kehren Idema.
Uh-huh.
That will get you to all the places, or on Instagram, you can find me there, or if you can find me, website is globalcollective.global, or you can find me on stacyidema.com.
Yeah, I'll link up everything anyway, so like it's easy to find.
Beautiful.
Stacy, so is there any question that I should have asked that I didn't, or a message, something that you want to share, or last words, something we haven't discussed yet?
No, you asked some really great questions. Any parting words? There's an internal wisdom that we all have. It's whether or not we want to be friends with it. And so it's, if I could leave any imparting words, you're smarter and more empowered than what you believe. It's whether or not you want to be friends with it. So if you're curious enough, start exploring.
I like that. Yeah. Starting to explore our own power. Yeah. Do we really want to express it? Yeah. Or not?
Yeah.
But yeah, I love it. Thank you so much, Stacy.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a beautiful insights into this masculine feminine journey, and I'm excited to keep following you and see what comes next. So thank you so much for spending time with us.
Absolutely. And thank you. This has been fun. Thank you for taking me on this journey. I haven't been on this journey for a while, so
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you to everyone, and I shall see you for another conversation next week. Bye.